Hello, yes, Wilmington. It's always a pleasure to be back home, so to speak. I used to live in Trolley Square for a few years early in my career in the early 90s. I won't tell you exactly what year, but that's one of the reasons why I have all this gray in my hair. But it's a pleasure to be back, albeit virtually. But thank you, yes, Wilmington, for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what I do and the work that I think is relevant to your community. And so without further ado, I'm going to partially introduce myself through my presentation. Hopefully you will be able to see my presentation in this as I bring it up. There it is. Worthy of investment, the devaluation of assets in Black communities. A lot of this information I'm about to share with you can be found in my new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, available wherever fine books are sold. I work at the Brookings Institution. I'm a senior fellow there where I study Black majority cities. And specifically, I look at the assets in them, the homes, the businesses, the infrastructure, excuse me, to really get a sense of wealth, prosperity, the overall conditions in which people live in. I'm actually going to begin this presentation at home. Like a lot of good stories, they always begin at home. This is where I grew up. This is 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small Black majority community surrounded by Pittsburgh on three sides. And as you can see here, this home is boarded up. You can uh, pick it up if you wish by agreeing to pay the taxes on the home. But the house is worth so much more to me. The reason being that woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her mom. As the story was told to me when I was born, she made a deal with my maternal grandmother. My mother at the time when I was born was poor. She already had a child at 15. She had me when she was 17. She was probably abused, but a deal was made. And mom, like a lot of Black matriarchs in the Black cities, she filled a breach that government or the private sector could not fill. And so she took in kids. Now, when I was born, I stayed there until I graduated from high school, but she took in several kids, some of varying durations. Some would stay a few weeks, some would stay a few months. I would stay until I graduated from high school. One of the reasons why I had to stay with mom is this is my father. He was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison for most of his life. He eventually was killed in prison. He was stabbed in the heart a day before his 27th birthday inside of Jackson State Penitentiary, a facility outside of Detroit. Now, for my book, I wanted to actually see how he lived. So I started looking at the conditions in all the neighborhoods and cities in which he lived. He bounced between Detroit and Pittsburgh. And so for the research for my book, I looked at those places. And to save a history lesson, I'm going to just go through this slide very quickly. But he lived in areas that were redlined. We generally know that the Homeowners Loan Corporation drew red lines around Black majority communities, precluding them from getting the low interest housing loans and down payment assistance their white counterparts had in the 30s and beyond. It set a horrible template of saying that Black communities, i.e. Black people, weren't worthy of investment. He also lived in areas that there was significant highway construction that barreled through his communities, both in Detroit and in Pittsburgh. He lived in areas where there was urban renewal, where the supposedly blighted properties were bulldozed, but they were never really rehabbed, or new construction wasn't in place. He also lived in areas where there was significant predatory lending. In particular, there was a lot of rent-to-own schemes near where he lived. And then he could not move elsewhere because there were restrictive housing covenants that prohibited Black people from moving in certain neighborhoods. All of this was occurring. But I wanted to also look at just current day home prices in those areas. And so I started measuring home prices in zip codes, not only where he lived, but all around the country. This is a chart. If you look on that x-axis, that's the percentage of Black people in a zip code. And if you look at the y-axis, as indicated by the price on top of the bars, that's the average home price in Black neighborhoods, both the census and Zillow price. And as you can see on this chart, it's pretty linear. As the percentage of Black people increases, the home prices in those zip codes decrease. And in places where the share of the Black population is less than 1%, homes are on average priced at $340,000. In areas where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher, those homes are priced about half as much. Now, people will say that's because of education, that's because of crime. But those are things you can control for in a study, and that's what we did. We looked at that absolute price, and we controlled for structural characteristics. So we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison of homes of similar size, same square footage, the same number of rooms. But then we also controlled for neighborhood amenities. So things like education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. Again, we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison between similarly sized homes and similar social circumstances. And what we found pretty much astounds, that homes in Black majority neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about $156 billion in lost equity. And that's occurring all across the country. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where home values in Black majority neighborhoods are underpriced. Wherever you see a green circle, that's where homes in Black areas are actually higher than their white counterparts. In particular, the Philly, Camden, Wilmington metropolitan area, there's a 27 or 28% difference, roughly about $36,000 per home. And this is occurring in metro areas all across the country. Lynchburg, Virginia, for instance, 81% difference. So again, these are apples to apple homes. So if you helicoptered a home from Lynchburg in a Black neighborhood and plopped it in a similar situated environment in a white neighborhood, it would increase in value by 81%. Rochester, New York, 65% different. Jacksonville, 47. Detroit, Dearborn area, 37%. And Shreveport, negative 9%, 9.5%. Again, there are places where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. Nashville, for instance, plus 10%. Boston, plus 23. But no, I just want to be clear, Boston's no less racist than Lynchburg, but the home prices are higher. 156 billion is a big number. It's hard to really feel what that means. So I'm going to put that in context to make it real for people. 156 billion would have financed more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a four-year public education. Replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan, 3,000 times over. It would have covered almost all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. The reason why I put that last bullet there is because it's clear. If my father lived in areas where home prices were market rate or the white rate, he would have had better schools. Remember, municipalities use the assessed value of homes to finance a lot of education. He would have had better infrastructure, better policing. He would have had more capacity to start a business, to go to college. Would have lived in areas with better infrastructure. Without question, I never excuse his behaviors. He probably abused my mother. His drug use was partially on him. But it is clear that discrimination is an accomplice in was an accomplice in his death. And it is an accomplice in the throttling of life all across this country. Now, I want to show you a clip. Oh, excuse me. I say all that to say that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. We're constantly blaming Black people for the conditions of Black cities, when in fact, things like redlining, racial housing covenants, segregation, predatory lending, all of these things impact neighborhood wellness. But whenever something goes wrong, we blame Black people. I'm here to tell you there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. But I want to show you what denying racism is. A lot of people simply just don't believe that wealth is being extracted regularly. In fact, I really do believe that it's a lack of information about redlining, or lack of information about discrimination overall, that allows people to fill these gaps with conspiracy theories and stereotypes about the conditions of Black cities. I'm going to play for you a little clip. This is Representative Al Green of Texas. I had an opportunity to present in the Financial Services Committee about discrimination in the appraisal industry. Now, we generally know that discrimination is throughout the housing market. We have tons of research on this area. And in recent weeks and months, we've seen numerous examples of appraisals gone horribly wrong when a white person stood in as the owner of these properties. Oftentimes, the home values went up hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I want to show you a clip to just show you the denial that is at play in many communities. Sorry.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
Well, since that hearing about 2 years ago, we've made strides with the appraisal community. They really have done a 180 on this. I do think that more people would raise their hand at this time. But clearly, we need to work on this issue. This is not just about appraisers. This is about real estate agents. It's about lenders. This is about society overall devaluing Black lives. I'm going to turn to another issue, a related issue, and that's business, because most people start their businesses using the equity in their home. And so if you have devaluation, you have less resources to start a business. Now, we know that Black people represent about 14% of the population, but only 2% of the nation's employer businesses, businesses with more than one employee. Now, only 1% of Black business owners were able to obtain a loan in their founding year compared to 7% of white entrepreneurs. Black entrepreneurs are denied bank loans more than twice as often. And when we do get loans, we pay higher interest rates. About half of Black businesses survived the Great Recession compared to 60% of white-owned firms. And we know that we're going to see similar numbers when the dust settles after this coronavirus pandemic, because we know that 95% of Black businesses did not receive PPP loan because they are sole proprietorships. And at the time, they did not qualify. And by the time the government caught up with this phenomenon, so many businesses had to close permanently. Now, a lot of reasons why the Black businesses are not getting investment is because people say that they don't have the similar service, the quality is not good. And so, just like housing, I wanted to explore that theory to see about the quality of Black, brown, and Asian firms in communities. So what we did was we looked at business revenue. We got that from Dun and Bradstreet, and we got the race of the owner. We then scraped all the Yelp data to get a sense of quality of all those businesses, so we could compare businesses that were owned by Black, brown, Asian, and white people. But then we control, just like in the housing study, we control for neighborhood conditions, spending power, education. We wanted to get an apples to apples comparison between businesses. And what we found is that Black, brown, and Asian owned firms are rated just as high, if not higher. Actually, they are rated higher in the aggregate, but when you control for business sector, it's even. And so Black, brown, Asian, and white businesses are, in terms of quality, the same. But but businesses in Black neighborhoods get fewer stars as the neighborhood gets Blacker. Let me show you. See that magenta line right there? That's Black, brown, and Asian owned firms. That white line represents white owned firms. Now, in all instances, the firms owned by people of color score higher on Yelp. But as you can see, as the neighborhood gets Blacker, the scores go down, and eventually the revenue goes down. The people are avoiding quality in the hood. And yes, and I said that the revenue goes down. And this is costing businesses in Black neighborhoods, high quality businesses, upwards of $4 billion in annual revenue lost. Now, there's a saying in Black communities, at least when I was growing up in Wilkinsburg, I used to hear this all the time. They would say, our ice is just as cold. Our ice is just as cold. Now that translate that in this data, it means that our businesses are just as good. The elders knew that if you avoid quality in the hood, you distort the market in a way that you force high quality businesses to compete with low quality businesses. You reduce the amount of revenue in that neighborhood, reducing the ability of that neighborhood to grow. And so our elders were right. Our ice is just as cold, and we deserve investment. Now, how do you counter this stuff? One, you got to invest in people. Let's be clear. Like, if you invest in place, I'll go to that second column. If you invest in place and not people, eventually property values increase. People can't keep pace with cost of living increases, and they essentially have to move. Now, we need in direct investment, meaning in entrepreneurs, homeowners. Cut the check. Folks need the capital. We need to remove the unnecessary bureaucratic barriers for entry into entrepreneurship or homeownership, for that matter. Remember, our ice is just as cold. So when we have Black, brown, and Asian folk go through these financial literacy courses or some kind of special program in order to get a grant or a loan, it doesn't really make much sense because our business owners are just as good as everyone else. So um, Black, brown, and Asian business owners don't need any additional education than their white peers. So we shouldn't have to have them jump through all these bureaucratic hoops. But we do need to invest in place. We need to make targeted infrastructure investments in Black neighborhoods. Because of devaluation, you have less resources for infrastructure improvement, for communities to invest in beautification projects, and other activities that would animate the value in local communities. We also need to partner with businesses and developers to incentivize renovation and provide commercial spaces. In my book, Know Your Price, I talk about buying back the block, in which governments and developers really do need to concentrate business development adjacent to Black communities in ways that increase business ownership, home ownership among Black folk, as well as provide services to the community and to incubate high growth industries or businesses in high growth industries. But we also need to divest from racism. We need to remove the policies that extract wealth from Black communities, like several practices in the appraisal industry, the price comparison model, for instance. When you compare homes in Black neighborhoods to others, oftentimes you're essentially recycling the discrimination that has always occurred. And so those homes never get out of this vicious trap of devaluing the homes. And just as we score policies, budget impact, we should score for racial equity as well. Whenever there's a policy or practice put out there, we should really understand and study what's the potential impact on Black, brown, and Asian folk. In addition, we need to install anti-racist policies that encourage inclusion. Too often in the implementation of policy, Black people are not included. Now, I'm going to just share with you the upside of investing in Black neighborhoods, people, and businesses. Now, Black people comprise approximately 14% of the population. I said that before, and only 2% of the nation's employer businesses. But so if Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, there would be 800,000 more businesses, 800,000. And you can see here, St. Louis has the number one or the best representation of Black businesses compared to the population. The Wilmington area is relatively low on that scale. You can get this information in the report, To Grow the Economy, Invest in Black Businesses. But you can see all across the country, we only see really one dark pink circle where the representation of businesses compared to the population is decent. Let's look at some other stats. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, there would be 20 in the Philly, Camden, Wilmington area. I'm going to focus on your neck of the woods. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population in the metro area there would be almost 30,000 more Black businesses in the Philly, Camden, Wilmington metro area. Also in the Philly, Camden, Wilmington metro area, if Black businesses increase their average revenue to the level of non-Black businesses, we would see an increase in total revenue by $2 billion, $2 billion. If the average employees per Black businesses increase to what non-Black firms are, we would add about approximately 42,000 jobs. Now, if Black businesses paid as much as non-Black businesses, then those employees would see an increase of pay of approximately $978 million. And if Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population and increase their employment to levels of non-Black in businesses, they would create more than 750,000 jobs. This is why I say all the time that equity is stimulus. If we can correct for these market failures and invest in Black businesses to the point we're reaching equity, um, it grows the proverbial pie. Too often we think if we invest in Black businesses, then we're taking away from white businesses. No, we need to grow the pie. I study underappreciated assets, meaning if you just add water, it will grow. Where we need to add water is in Black businesses, Black homeowners. Now, I want to before I close, I want to uplift a competition or an opportunity for folks in Wilmington. We are Brookings and the Ashoka organization have just recently launched a challenge competition in which we're going to give away $1 million to some of the best ideas in how to stop devaluation in communities. If you have new mortgage products you think you want to model or test, if you have new credit scoring systems, or you want to create new zoning ordinances, we want to hear about it. Anything that you think can solve for devaluation, we want to hear, and we potentially want to invest. And if you're a funder, we want to make sure that as many people in Wilmington gets an opportunity to participate. So if you're a funder, let us know. We're constantly looking for local foundations who also want to participate in this challenge or to help support people in their local communities to make sure that they get some investment. So please just look up Brookings Ashoka Challenge and you'll learn all the details, but we would love to have you involved. And again, a lot of this can be found in my new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black City. It's actually not that new. But I want to thank Yes Wilmington for having me, and I look forward to working with you in the future. In closing, I just want to give the where I got the name Know Your Price. Know Your Price comes from my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running by August Wilson, the great August Wilson. And in the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. The city of Pittsburgh offers Memphis $15,000 for the property, to which he replies, "No, I'm not selling my property. I got my price. I know my price." I'm paraphrasing. But the point is that he refuses to give up his property for a low amount. There's another character, Hambone, who in the play. And now Hambone paints a fence for a proprietor, and the deal is he would get a ham after he painted the fence. He paints the fence, he never gets his ham. And throughout the play, Hambone says, "Give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham." And we don't know if he had mental illness before, but eventually he goes crazy and dies demanding his ham. Now, a lot of people are like, well, that's pretty depressing. But in actuality, there's a happy ending to the story. The main character, Memphis, actually gets $35,000 for the property. It's assumed that he's getting the white rate or the market rate. But the point of my book is should be clear. One, know that you have to know your worth. But what my book, Know Your Price, does is try to give people the price to stand on in multiple sectors. And so that's my charge to you. We've got to make the demand for change because we see that people will deny that racism exists. People will look for some convenient moment where things magically come together to end racial injustice. Well, if we can't figure this out after the horrible events of January 6th and so many before that, then we're missing the point. We've got to demand our price. Even if it means going crazy and dying, we've got to demand our worth. So that's my charge to you, Wilmington. Thank you for having me, and go, yes, Wilmington.